She walked into the building that morning with quiet confidence, her portfolio tucked neatly under her arm, her hair pulled back, and her sleeves rolled up, despite knowing the world often judged her for what they could see inked into her skin. The receptionist looked her up and down with an expression that suggested she was already out of place. A few people in the waiting area glanced at her, some with faint curiosity, others with quiet disapproval. Tattoos still carried a certain stigma in places that clung to old-fashioned notions, and she was used to that. What she didn't expect was just how far the judgment would go that day. The company was one of those well-polished giants with glass walls, minimalist decor, and suits that moved briskly through the halls. She was there under the assumption that she was applying for a senior management role, a test of her leadership, strategy, and innovation. She had built a strong reputation in the industry, but many didn't know her by face, only by the impact of her decisions. She had chosen to keep her identity in the shadows of her accomplishments, letting her work speak louder than her presence. When her name was called, she stood tall and entered the interview room. 3 executives sat at the long table, each with resumes, notes, and cold expressions. She smiled warmly and extended her hand, but the first thing one of them did was glance at the ink on her forearm. It was a bold, intricate design, not one of rebellion, but of meaning. Symbols from her life, reminders of the struggles she had overcome and the heritage she cherished. Yet the panel did not ask about her skills, her background, or her vision. Instead, one of them leaned back and muttered under his breath, "Unprofessional." The interview never really began. She tried to speak, to explain her experience, her proven record of leading teams to success, but their eyes stayed fixed on the ink that adorned her skin. Another panelist interrupted her after barely a minute, saying, "This isn't the look we want representing our company." Her voice caught in her throat, but she refused to plead. She simply gathered her papers, thanked them for their time, and stood to leave. The words cut deeper than they realized when one of them casually said, "We don't need people like you here." She walked out of that building without anger on her face, only a quiet fire burning in her chest. The guards at the entrance, the receptionist, and even some waiting candidates watched her exit with assumptions about failure. But what none of them knew was that she was not a desperate applicant looking for validation. She was the majority shareholder of that very company, the unseen hand that had fueled its rise from a struggling startup to a recognized name in the market. She had been away, working from the shadows, investing in the future while testing the people who ran her empire in her absence. This interview was never about her needing the job. It was about her seeing who was fit to be trusted with her vision. The following week, when she returned, it was not with a portfolio, but with authority. She walked through the same glass doors, and this time every eye turned toward her not as a stranger, but as the newly announced CEO. The executives who had dismissed her were called into the conference room once again, their faces pale with the realization of who she was. They remembered the tattoos, the quick dismissal, the arrogance with which they had spoken to her. Silence filled the room when she entered, wearing the same calm expression she had carried before. She looked at them not with spite, but with measured grace. "I came here last week to see how this company treats talent," she said evenly. "I wanted to know if we look at potential or if we judge character by appearances." The weight of her words pressed into the walls. "You failed that test." The same panel that had thrown her out now sat trembling, their previous authority stripped away. She did not raise her voice, nor did she show anger. Instead, she reminded them that the future of business required more than rigid stereotypes. Creativity, diversity, and authenticity were the lifeblood of innovation, and any organization that rejected them would fall behind. Her tattoos, once ridiculed as unprofessional, became a symbol of defiance against shallow judgments. The story spread beyond the walls of the company. Employees whispered about it in hallways, candidates shared it on social platforms, and soon it became a headline in business circles. She was thrown out of the interview for her tattoo until they learned she was the CEO. People debated it endlessly. Some defended tradition, insisting that professionalism required a certain appearance. But far more voices rose in support, arguing that skill, leadership, and vision mattered infinitely more than ink on skin. Her story became more than just corporate drama. It became a mirror to society's outdated biases. For years, people with tattoos had been branded as reckless, untrustworthy, or rebellious. Yet here was proof that talent could not be boxed into stereotypes. She became an icon, not only for professionals who had been judged by appearances, but also for the younger generation who feared they had to hide their true selves to be accepted. Inside the company, things changed dramatically under her leadership. Dress codes were relaxed, not into chaos, but into authenticity. Employees were encouraged to bring their whole selves to work, whether that meant showing their tattoos, wearing cultural attire, or expressing individuality in ways that fueled creativity. The old guard resisted at first, but soon the results spoke louder than doubt. Productivity rose, new ideas flourished, and the company began to attract talent that had once overlooked it for being too rigid. The executives who had dismissed her faced the consequences. Some were removed from their positions, while others were retrained under her vision of leadership. Not all were able to adapt, but those who did became champions of change. She believed in second chances, but only for those who showed the willingness to grow beyond prejudice. What made her story so compelling was not just the twist of her identity, but the way she handled it. She did not use her power to humiliate those who had humiliated her. Instead, she used it to teach, to expose the cost of narrow thinking, and to prove that leadership was not about maintaining old walls, but about breaking them down. Over time, her tattoos became a symbol tied to the company itself. They were featured in campaigns, not as rebellion, but as representation of the message. Strength comes from authenticity. Shareholders, employees, and clients admired the transformation, and under her leadership, the company reached unprecedented heights. The memory of that first interview, however, never left her. She recalled the sting of rejection, the casual dismissal, the voices that said, "We don't need people like you." But she turned that moment into fuel, a reminder of why she chose to step forward from the shadows and take control. Her story was told in conferences, books, and even classrooms where young professionals were learning that the future of leadership belonged to those who could see beyond appearances. In the end, her legacy was not just about being the CEO with tattoos. It was about proving that true leadership comes from resilience, vision, and the courage to be unapologetically yourself in a world that constantly tries to mold you into something else. She became living proof that what others see as weakness can, in reality, be the very strength that defines your greatness. And so, the story of the woman who was thrown out of an interview for her tattoo, only to be revealed as the CEO, was etched into the narrative of modern business as a timeless lesson. Never underestimate the quiet strength of someone who refuses to be defined by your prejudice.